The very interesting thing about Union Mills, it's of course in Carroll County, and it's been around since the inception of our country, and back when George Washington was president. And so a time of great importance to our country, a time of a lot of change. And so those things that the founders of Union Mills experienced have a very important lesson for us today.
Well, Union Mills began as a partnership with David and Andrew Shriver, looking for a place where they could operate a business. They built a mill here, a sawmill, and they chose the name Union Mills because of the business enterprises that they started and the partnership of the two brothers.
Always interesting when brothers partner, because brothers, even though they're from the same family, are often quite different. But many times brothers bring those skills that the other one lacks, and resources and connections and networking that can then create something more that did not exist before. And so you see the Union Mills, the forming of two mills, if you will, in one economic operation, expanded the opportunities for the whole community.
The house itself was a double house, and it was built for both Andrew and David Shriver. Later, David became superintendent for building the National Road and left, and he sold his partnership out to Andrew Shriver, whose family remained here. Andrew's family grew. He had 11 children with his wife Elizabeth, and the 6 rooms they started with in that double house ended up growing to 23. Then over generations, different family members have lived here, as many generations, both grandparents, aunts, uncles, even orphan children came to live with their grandparents at Union Mills. And that multi-generation, the multi-family aspect of Union Mills carried up probably right up into the final days when 3 brothers ended up as inheriting the homestead in 1957.
One of the neat things about the homestead is it's not just a house, it was a home. It was a home for a family, 6 generations. It was 160 years permanently occupied, and all its furnishings are there. It was a home. A family lived here. A family built it. It's just like a family walked right out of it. But when you walk in, it's as if you're just in a house and you're welcome to visit.
An operation like Union Mills, was very the center of community. Very important that people depended on each other. Farmers were doing their thing, but they came then to Union Mills with their grain, needed that service, and then it became a hub. And relationships developed because of that.
I think what really makes the Union Mills Homestead unique is its business enterprises, starting with a mill, a sawmill. They had a cooper shop to build the barrels to ship the grain through the port of Baltimore. They had a blacksmith shop for repairing ironwork and farm tools. They built the tannery that gave them income from processing leather. And they also kept modernizing the enterprises. They added steam boilers to the tannery. They changed the mill from a wooden geared operation to metal turbines so they could operate year-round. So they're always inventive and growing and modernizing the site. It also led them into the canning industry.
I can only imagine the importance, the dependence that people had on each other to survive, to raise food, to bring it to market, to share it with others, and have the advantages that a market system could bring. So the development of those business relationships and that community, that raised the standard of living. We're living the fruits of that. Began back at a place like the homestead and repeated other places around. But at the homestead, this was a way of life that went on for many generations, and those partnerships built and expanded beyond grain to the tannery, to leather goods, to other areas and opportunities. So as the world changed, so did the homestead. And so that history of change, that those business opportunities were a lesson for us of how partnership helps you build, that fills in the gaps that you need to improve, to make improvements, to take advantage of technology.
Well, it was a gathering place, of course, because of all the business and everything. But with the family, you have social events. And I think one of the interesting things is the parlor, where we welcome our visitors when they come to visit, is a place that after church on Sunday, the family would gather. You would celebrate birthdays, you would celebrate anniversaries, weddings, and all types of a thing that a family has. A home is a gathering place. And it's interesting to find how much gathering went on here. Large families, but relatives would come and visit. All kinds of activities went on. This place was alive, and alive as a home should be.
Throughout that time, the family stayed close. They did become divided at politics at the Civil War, part of the family becoming strong Union supporters, the other side becoming strong Southern supporters. That period of time had heated arguments, differences of opinions, but they grew back together in the years following, attending their daughters' weddings and socializing and rejoining in that effort of friendship, partnership, and business working together.
I represent the 6th generation of the Shriver clan to have occupied the homestead. My father was Philip Shriver Klein, and he and his brothers, Fred and Richard, came into ownership of the homestead in 1950. I did spend a week or two every summer there from the early 50s through the mid-60s. My grandmother, Winifred Shriver, one of the last kids to grow up in the homestead, I never really knew. She died when I was still an infant. Her sister, Bessie, who did live at the homestead her entire life, I did know. She died in 1957, just short of her 88th birthday. While she was alive, every visit of ours to the homestead included an audience with Aunt Bessie. She lived in her side of the house. We stayed on Uncle Lou's side. At the appointed time, we would go to her door, be escorted into the front parlor. She would usually be on the couch. We would sit rather stiffly on chairs. I honestly don't recall the conversations very well, but I know that she was very old. I was very young. I had been told to be on my best behavior. And frankly, she scared me just a little bit.
We played everywhere and had so much fun. We went over to Cousin Lou's. We played over in Cousin Lou's barn. We played in Cousin Lou's, or maybe it wasn't Cousin Lou's, but a mill, but we played in the mill. We often saw Cousin Lou walking back and forth. I'm not sure he always approved of us. We were little, so we got in a lot of mischief. Cousin Lou would walk over to the mill, and he would go in, and there were always farmers sitting in that little office. They had the most wonderful stove in there that they burned all year round. And they all sit around in the stove talking. And I think that was Cousin Lou's way of keeping up with everything in the community. But he sat there and talked to all the farmers, and the farmers sat there while the miller was taking care of their orders.
There were a lot of events that I recall happening at Union Mills while I was there. From informal picnics down on the Bowman Bridge when it still went over Pipe Creek, to in 1957, a formal dinner party in celebration of my Uncle Fred and Aunt Florence's 25th wedding anniversary.
And the small rural community of Union Mills kind of wound down, and the site itself became more of a keeper of the family traditions than as a growing progressive enterprise that it had been through the early generations.
My Uncle Fred was a Civil War buff, and this gave him the idea, because of Union Mills' role in the Civil War, to create it as an attraction during the Civil War centennial to make the most of the public's renewed interest in that period of American history. So along with fixing up the house for tours, he created a small Civil War museum in the mill on the first floor. This was before the mill machinery had been restored to working order.
Growing up as a youngster in Carroll County, I saw this homestead as sort of being simply associated with the Civil War. And it was a very interesting story and kept my interest for many years, still does. But the homestead is really not limited to that Civil War history. History of the mill, the history of the tannery are all great stories. That sort of early industrial complex being a center. And you know, Carroll County had many little centers of industry, if you will. The wonderful thing about Union Mills Homestead is that's still there and still captured, and it's a great treasure for us and for future historians to mine, to learn more, to bring out the stories that we don't even know are there. They just need to be uncovered.
As the idea of Union Mills as a tourist destination started catching on, the Klein brothers realized that they needed help. They could not do it all alone. So in the mid-1960s, they created the Union Mills Homestead Foundation to share the burden. And I've got to say, I'm absolutely thrilled and amazed, as would they be, that here we are 65 years after the last full-time resident died, and the Mills is thriving.
We sometimes think about a home and we think about all the chores and all the things you did, but there were celebrations. There were wonderful family things, and luckily we have pictures. One thing was a summer frolic, corn frolic. They had a picnic when the corn was coming in, and one of our events, the corn roast, is reflecting that type of thing that the family actually did here. I think a corn roast and watermelon frolic. But the family celebrated. There were birthdays, Christmas. Our Christkindlmarkt reflects the German heritage of the family, and that some of the customs that would have been done here for Christmas time, and what the family had. We have some artifacts and things that the family gifts they had, a sled, a particular story about Christmas at the homestead that was written for one of the children that we have to tell about those things. So life was, yes, every day, but it was also very special occasions. And that is really what people treasure, is spending those family times together. And the homestead provided that for a family.
In 1997, when I wrote the bicentennial chapter to my Uncle Fred's 1957 essay about Union Mills, the so-called Red Book, I quoted Fred's conclusion, which said, "How long can the old homestead and the mill further withstand age, time, and weather?" Well, we've made it 65 years now, but the homestead and the mill are exceedingly fragile, and Fred's question remains a challenge. I love that the story of Union Mills has been a story of partnerships, that at the beginning, Andrew and David started us off in 1797. In the mid-1800s, two brothers, Andrew K. and William, ran separate parts of the business next to one another. By the 1940s, two aging sisters ended up owning the homestead. And then in the 1950s, three brothers, Richard, Frederick, and Philip, wanted to share the history that the place holds. The Klein brothers created a foundation that could use the site and the Shriver story to teach that history. And now, an astounding 225 years later, there's a whole network of family and friends keeping Union Mills alive. The foundation and the county work together in a partnership, as the property is owned by the county but operated by the foundation. This history of collaboration is the key part of the Union Mills story. So I just want to say, on behalf of the 6 generations past and all those who will follow, thank you.